Blackwood University, located in the state of Maine, USA. Founded in 1874, the university is known for its academic excellence, but also for the unexplained events that haunt its campus. The university has a history of unresolved disappearances and rumors of secret experiments being conducted within its facilities. Ethan Carter dragged his suitcase down the narrow hallway of Blake Hall, the scent of old wood and damp air hanging in the atmosphere. The dormitory, one of the oldest buildings at Blackwood University, was known for being haunted, but he never paid much attention to those stories. It was just an old building, nothing more. Room 306 was at the end of the hall in a quieter wing. As he turned the key in the lock, the door creaked open, as if it hadn't been used in years. The first thing he noticed was the cold, a chill in the air despite the heat being on. He ignored the sensation and began unpacking. His roommate, Alex, hadn't arrived yet. The beds were simply arranged, one by the window, the other against the wall. Ethan chose the one by the window, hoping for a better view of the campus. The tree leaves outside swayed violently, despite there being no wind. That night, as he tried to sleep, a faint sound interrupted his thoughts, a low whisper, almost imperceptible. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. He looked around, but the room was dark and silent. Maybe it was just the noise of the old building? He closed his eyes again, but then he felt something strange. The mattress sank slightly, as though someone had sat on the edge of the bed. His body froze. Slowly, he opened his eyes, but no one was there. He turned to the side, pulling the covers tightly around him. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Yes, just exhaustion. Tomorrow everything would feel normal. He just didn't know that this was the first of many nights to come. The next morning, Ethan woke with a strange sense of unease. The room looked normal in the daylight, but the cold remained. He checked the window. It was tightly shut. Maybe the dorm's heating system was just faulty. Alex arrived later that afternoon, throwing his backpack onto the bed and greeting Ethan with a friendly smile.
Hey man, ready for this year?
Ethan nodded, but didn't mention the feeling he had experienced the night before. On the second night, while sleeping, something abruptly woke him. It was a scratching sound, soft but persistent. He turned on the light and examined the room. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He lay back down, convinced it was just his imagination. But on the third night, things escalated. He woke at 3:33 a.m. with the feeling of being watched. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, and looked around. The darkness seemed thicker. That's when he saw it. The closet door was ajar. He was sure he had closed it before going to bed. With a churning stomach, he slowly got out of bed and closed the closet door. As he returned to his bed, he heard a soft whisper by his ear. The air grew cold. His body went rigid. He tried to tell himself it was the wind, but there was no wind. From that night onward, Ethan slept less and less. The cold in the room seemed to worsen, and he began to notice small changes, objects out of place, the closet door opening on its own, and the sound of footsteps when he was alone. Alex didn't notice anything unusual.
You're imagining things, man. You're probably just tired from the semester starting. Relax.
But Ethan couldn't relax. Each night, the events became more intense. He would wake with the sensation of invisible hands touching his arms, or warm breath on his neck. The whispers grew clearer, though still unintelligible. On one particularly terrifying night, Ethan woke to a weight pressing down on his chest. His body was paralyzed, and he felt invisible fingers tightening around his throat. He struggled to move, but couldn't. His eyes widened as he saw a dark figure standing beside his bed. It was tall, thin, with hollow, glowing eyes, and then it vanished. When he finally regained movement, gasping for air, he realized Alex was sound asleep, oblivious to everything. The next morning, Ethan did something he didn't want to admit. He searched for legends of Blake Hall on Google, and he found something that made his blood run cold. A story about a student who had died in room 306 decades earlier under mysterious circumstances. Ethan shuddered. He wasn't imagining things. There was something there with him, and it didn't want him to leave. Determined to understand what was happening, Ethan went to the university library. He dug through old newspapers and found an article from 1978 about Daniel Grayson, a student who had lived in room 306 and was found dead under inexplicable circumstances. The article described how Daniel had been tormented by something invisible, complaining of whispers and a dark figure. He couldn't bear the pressure, and on one fateful night, he was found lifeless, eyes wide open and handprints around his neck as though he had been strangled. The story made Ethan break into a cold sweat. He returned to the dorm and told Alex everything, who finally seemed to take the situation seriously.
This can't be a coincidence, man. We need to get out of here.
But leaving wasn't that simple. That night, the presence in the room manifested violently. Ethan's mattress shook violently, doors slammed, and a dark shadow formed in the center of the room. The whisper turned into a scream. Alex screamed in fear, and the two of them ran out of the dormitory. But before Ethan could leave, he heard a voice clearly inside his mind.
You can't escape.
The real horror was just beginning. Ethan and Alex spent the night in the campus study lounge, unable to return to the dorm. Ethan, determined to put an end to it, sought out a history professor, Dr. Helena Marsh, an expert in local folklore. She revealed that Daniel Grayson wasn't the first victim. Room 306 had a history of mysterious deaths dating back to the 1920s. Something there fed off the fear of the students. Ethan realized that running away wasn't an option. He would have to confront the entity before he became its next victim. Ethan tried to leave the dormitory but found himself trapped in the room, as if stuck in a time loop. The next night, he reviewed the new recording and saw something even worse. He himself was sleeping, but with a face that wasn't his. The day seemed like any other at school, but something strange was in the air. The literature students were about to meet the new substitute teacher, Miss Holloway. As she entered the room, she introduced herself with an unsettling calmness. Her eyes, slightly larger than normal, seemed to observe everyone with excessive attention. The smile on her face never disappeared no matter what happened. Despite her impeccable posture and her appearance as a model teacher, something in the way she spoke and moved seemed out of place. She spoke with unwavering clarity, as if she knew exactly what to say to keep everyone engaged. But there was something odd in the way she approached the students, her eyes fixed, her smile unending. Some, like Jake Reynolds, couldn't help but feel uncomfortable being near her. Something was wrong, but no one could identify what. She quickly gained the trust of the class, but something felt disconnected, as if she were an outsider among them. The lessons were boring, but also hypnotic. The students always left unsure of what they'd learned, as if the hours had simply disappeared. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that something was being hidden, but no one else seemed to notice, or at least no one was willing to question it. But Jake knew something wasn't right, and he would start investigating. As the days passed, the strangeness only grew. All the students in the literature class began to notice something peculiar. Whenever they left the room after lessons with Miss Holloway, they couldn't remember anything that had been taught. It was as if time had simply vanished. Jake, who had already started feeling uneasy from the beginning, began paying closer attention to the details. He noticed that when he spoke with his classmates about the lessons, they all seemed to have the same sense of emptiness.
Do you remember what she said about the book? I can't remember anything,
said one of his friends, Mark. Jake tried to concentrate, but Miss Holloway's words seemed to have dissipated into the air, leaving no trace. He started observing the teacher's behavior more carefully. She never seemed tired. Her movements were always controlled, almost mechanical. Her eyes, even when fixed on the students, never blinked, a feature Jake found peculiar. How could someone keep their eyes fixed without blinking the whole time? He tried to remember the time she'd touched objects or moved her hair, but nothing stood out. She was almost too perfect. Jake decided to investigate. He began paying closer attention to his classmates' reactions and noticed that they all seemed to be sucked into the same endless routine. It was as if they were in a state of hypnosis, but no one questioned it. However, Jake couldn't ignore the feeling that something was being manipulated. Maybe Miss Holloway wasn't who she said she was. Determined to find out more, Jake started formulating a plan. He would need proof, something concrete, to confirm his suspicions about the teacher. Jake was determined. The feeling that something was wrong with Miss Holloway consumed him, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed proof. That's when he had an idea. If the lessons were being erased from everyone's memory, maybe recording one of them could reveal what was happening. The next night, he prepared his camera. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to do anything to uncover the truth. During class, he kept the camera discreetly hidden in his backpack, filming as Miss Holloway began discussing the classic novel they were studying. She spoke with unwavering clarity, as always, but Jake felt that something was terribly wrong. When reviewing the footage later, what he saw left him in shock. On the screen, the entire class was there, sitting in their seats as usual, listening attentively. But the teacher, she wasn't in the recording. The screen only showed an empty room, with the students staring straight ahead, as if in a trance. No words were spoken by anyone, but the expressions on their faces were empty, as if they were living in an alternate reality. Jake stopped the recording and rewound it, trying to understand what he had just seen. He fast-forwarded through the video multiple times, but no matter how much he tried, Miss Holloway wasn't there. She had disappeared from the footage as if she had never existed. The most disturbing part was that when he looked at the students, he noticed that no one seemed to move. Their eyes were fixed, but they didn't blink. There wasn't a single small movement to indicate life. They were frozen in time, ready to follow the routine without questioning, as if they were being controlled by something or someone. Jake's heart raced. He knew he had something in his hands that could explain everything, but at the same time, it meant his worst fear was coming true. The teacher wasn't human. She never had been. She was manipulating the students, erasing their memories and making them follow a pattern without them realizing anything. But how and why? He decided to go to the principal's office to confront them. If Miss Holloway didn't exist, maybe the administration knew something he didn't. When he got there, he was greeted by the principal, who seemed visibly uncomfortable with his presence. Jake laid it all out: the footage, the changes in the students' behavior, the oddness of the teacher. The principal listened in silence, but didn't seem surprised.
Jake, you need to forget this.
With an almost frightening calmness.
There is no teacher named Miss Holloway. You're just imagining things.
But her eyes didn't seem human. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He insisted, showing the video, but to his surprise, the principal didn't hesitate to say,
You deleted everything. The video no longer exists.
Jake felt his stomach drop. How? He hadn't erased anything. He went back to his camera and checked it, but the file had indeed disappeared. The video, the proof he so desperately needed, was no longer there. Panicking, he searched every corner of his phone, but nothing remained. The principal smiled again, now with a more threatening expression.
You'll forget, Jake. Everyone will forget. This cannot continue.
Disoriented and lost, Jake left the office, trying to understand what had just happened. But as he stepped out, something even stranger happened. When he looked down the hall, he saw his classmates, all with the same vacant stares, the same slightly strange smiles. They no longer looked human. And more disturbing still, Jake felt like he was being watched, as though he had walked into a game he didn't know how to play. The next morning, he tried to talk to his friends about what had happened, but no one seemed to remember anything. The memory of the conversation with the principal, the video, everything seemed to have been erased, as if it had never existed. His classmates even looked at him suspiciously, as if he were the odd one, but Jake couldn't forget. Something was wrong, and he didn't know what to do to unravel the mystery. Suddenly, he felt like the city, the school, the people. Everything was shaping around a huge lie. But who was behind it? And why did he, and only he, seem to remember? He decided he couldn't stop. He needed to find out what was going on before. It was too late. Jake could no longer ignore the growing feeling that something monstrous was unfolding around him. He spent sleepless nights trying to understand what had happened at school, desperately trying to piece together the puzzle. But the answers were elusive, disappearing as he tried to dig deeper. With no other option, Jake returned to school the next day and went straight to the principal's office. He knew he would need answers. But when he walked in, he found the same principal who had reassured him the night before, with her forced smile and her eyes hiding a coldness he now recognized. Before he could speak, she interrupted him.
Jake, you have to stop this. This won't end well for you. It's better to move on and forget what you saw.
Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He was willing to do anything to understand the truth.
You are lying. I saw the video. I saw what happened to Miss Holloway. I know she's not human.
Trying to control the anger and desperation building inside him. The principal calmly stood up from her chair. Her eyes gleamed in a way that made Jake's heart race. She moved closer to him, her smile no longer friendly, but enigmatic.
You're more cunning than we thought, Jake. But there are things you shouldn't understand. Not now. The truth is, it's too risky.
She paused, looking deeply into his eyes.
But since you insist, let's show what happens to those who seek too much.
Jake felt a sense of vertigo, as if he were being pulled into a much deeper and darker place. Suddenly he realized that the school, the principal's office, even the reality around him were changing. He found himself surrounded by an oppressive silence, and the principal no longer seemed like herself. She had somehow become an entity, a presence that transcended the human body.
You won't remember any of this, Jake. But what you discovered will stay with you forever, in a place where you can't escape.
Jake tried to move, but something stopped him. His legs were paralyzed. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. The air around him was dense, heavy, as if it had closed in around him. The feeling of helplessness took over his body. As he looked, powerless, at the principal, who now seemed something much larger than he had ever imagined, suddenly everything went quiet. The principal smiled once more, her eyes narrowing.
Now, Jake, you forget.
And with a snap, everything went dark.